In 1095, Pope Urban II preached a war. Europe answered. Hundreds of thousands took the cross. They crossed a continent. They starved outside Antioch. And on the 15th of July, 1099, they breached the walls of Jerusalem. The holy city fell in blood. Then came the harder task, keeping it. 4 Crusader states rose from the conquest: Jerusalem, Tripoli, Antioch, Edessa. Baldwin I took a crown that Godfrey had refused to wear. Warrior monks, the Templars and Hospitallers, became the deadliest soldiers in the East. For 45 years, the kingdom survived on a single borrowed advantage, a Muslim world too divided to strike back. Then came Zengi, the man from Mosul. On Christmas Eve, 1144, his army broke through the walls of Edessa. The first Crusader state was erased. When the news reached Europe, it did not sound like a defeat. It sounded like a warning. Europe would answer with the largest army since the First Crusade itself. 2 kings, 2 empires, 1 promise: take back what was lost. This is what happened when they tried. The most feared man in the Muslim world was killed by a servant. September 1146. The fortress of Qalat Jabbar on the Euphrates. Imad-ud-Din Zengi, conqueror of Edessa, the man who had broken the Crusader shield, lay drunk in his tent. A slave named Yarinkosh crept inside. He had been caught drinking his master's wine. He knew what Zengi did to men who failed him. So he made a choice. The blade went in before the guards woke. By morning, the terror of the East was dead. Murdered not by kings or armies, but by fear of his own cruelty. His empire shattered within days. His soldiers looted his own camp. They pulled the rings from his fingers while his body was still warm. And in Aleppo, his second son took power. A quiet, pious, calculating man of 28. His name was Nur-ud-Din. The Crusaders would learn it well. Here is the question this episode must answer. In 1147, Europe launched its rescue mission, the Second Crusade. Not peasants this time, not adventurers. 2 of the most powerful kings alive, Conrad of Germany, Louis of France. Tens of thousands of soldiers, blessed by the Pope, preached by a saint. It was the greatest army the crusading world had ever assembled. And it achieved nothing. Worse than nothing. Every defeat it suffered taught its enemies exactly how to win. Every mistake it made handed the Muslim world the one thing it had always lacked: a reason to unite. How does a rescue mission become the weapon that destroys you? How did 2 kings march east to save a kingdom and end up building its executioner? 40 years, 3 men. Zengi lit the fire. Nur-ad-Din built the furnace. And a young Kurdish officer named Yusuf was about to walk into it. The news of Edessa took a year to change Europe. At first, it was rumor, then refugees, then confirmation. An entire Crusader state gone. Pope Eugenius III issued a bull, Quantum Praedecessors. It promised what Urban had promised in 1095, forgiveness of sins for those who marched. But the Pope was not the voice of this crusade. The voice belonged to a monk, Bernard of Clairvaux, frail, fasting, half-starved by his own discipline, and the most persuasive man in Europe. Kings feared his letters. Popes owed him their thrones. When Bernard spoke, Christendom listened. On Easter Sunday, 1146, at Vézelay in Burgundy, he stood on a wooden platform in an open field because no cathedral could hold the crowd. Beside him stood the King of France, Louis VII, 25 years old, a king carrying a wound of his own. 3 years earlier, his army had burned a church at Vitry, with over 1,000 people inside. Louis had watched it burn. He had barely slept since. For Louis, the crusade was not politics. It was penance. Bernard preached. The crowd roared. They tore his robes to pieces for relics. So many demanded the cross that Bernard ran out of cloth badges and cut strips from his own habit. Then he went north, into Germany. King Conrad III did not want this war. His kingdom was unstable. His nobles were feuding. Bernard cornered him at Christmas Mass in Speyer. He spoke not as diplomat, but as Christ himself. Man, what ought I to have done for you that I have not done? Conrad wept and took the cross. By spring 1147, 2 royal armies were forming, perhaps 35,000 fighting men between them, with tens of thousands of pilgrims behind. Nothing this size had marched east in 50 years. In Constantinople, the Byzantine emperor read the reports and felt something closer to dread than relief. He remembered what the First Crusade had done to lands it claimed to be saving. The rescue was coming. And almost no one asked the one question that mattered. Rescue? Of what, exactly? Edessa was already beyond saving. In late 1146, its former count tried retaking it. He held the city for 6 days. Nur ad-Din's response erased Edessa from history. The walls were torn down, the population enslaved or killed. The First Crusader state was not just lost, it no longer existed. The Second Crusade began dying in Anatolia, exactly where the first had nearly died before it. But this time, there would be no miracle. Conrad's German army marched first, in October 1147. He ignored Byzantine advice to hug the coast. He took the direct road, the desert road. His supplies ran out in 9 days. Near Dor-Elam, on the 25th of October, Seljuk horse archers found the starving column. They did not charge, they circled. Arrows fell like weather, hour after hour. The Germans could not catch what they could not reach. 9/10 of Conrad's army was destroyed or scattered. The king himself was wounded and fled. The largest contingent of the crusade was gone before it ever saw the Holy Land. Louis of France fared little better. His army crawled along the Anatolian coast in winter. With him rode his queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine, 25 years old, richer than her husband, sharper than most of his council. In January 1148, at Mount Cadmus, the French vanguard broke formation to camp early. The Turks poured into the gap. Louis spent the night fighting on a boulder, unrecognized, swinging his sword at anyone who climbed. By morning, the army had lost its baggage, its horses, and its belief. At the port of Italia, Louis made a cold decision. He took the ships, for the nights only. The pilgrims, the poor, were left behind to walk a coastline that would kill most of them. The rescue mission was now abandoning the people it had promised to save. In March 1148, Louis reached Antioch and walked into a different kind of trap. Antioch was ruled by Raymond of Poitiers, tall, brilliant, charming, and Eleanor's uncle. Raymond had a plan that made perfect military sense. Strike Aleppo. Strike Nur ad-Din now, before his power hardened into something permanent. Eleanor agreed with her uncle, loudly, publicly. Louis refused. His vow was to reach Jerusalem. Pilgrimage first, strategy second. The argument turned poisonous. Eleanor demanded an annulment of the marriage. Louis left Antioch at night, dragging his queen out by force. The scandal would follow them for the rest of their lives. And the one strategy that might have worked, killing Nur ad-Din's power in its cradle, was left behind in Antioch, unused. What was left of 2 royal armies gathered at Acre in June 1148? Kings, princes, patriarchs, masters of the military orders, the greatest assembly of Crusader leadership ever held. They had one decision to make: where to strike. Edessa, the reason for the entire crusade, was not even discussed. It was rubble. Aleppo, Nur ad-Din's capital, was too far, so they chose Damascus. On paper, it was not madness. Damascus was rich, ancient, and strategically vital. But it was also the one Muslim power still allied to the Crusaders. Its rulers feared Nur ad-Din more than they feared Jerusalem. For years, Damascus had paid tribute to the kingdom, a buffer state, holding the balance of the East. The crusade was about to attack its own ally. On the 24th of July, 1148, the army reached the orchards west of the city. Mile after mile of walled gardens, water channels, and fruit trees. It was hard fighting, wall by wall, but there was water, food, and cover. Within a day, the Crusaders held the orchards. The city was close enough to hit with arrows. Damascus began to panic. Its governor sent riders galloping north to Nur ad-Din. Then, on the third day, the Crusader command made a decision that historians still struggle to explain. They abandoned the orchards. They moved the entire army east to open ground with no cover and no water. Some said local barons gave treacherous advice. Some whispered about Damascene gold. Some blamed a quarrel over who would rule the city once it fell. Whatever the truth, the position was fatal. Nur ad-Din's army was 2 days away. On the 28th of July, after 4 days, the crusade turned around and marched home. 4 days. The greatest army in 50 years broke against Damascus in 4 days. Turkish cavalry harried the retreat, filling the roadside with corpses. Conrad sailed home in disgust. Louis lingered a year, then followed. Bernard of Clairvaux, the saint who preached it all, spent his final years explaining the failure, calling it the judgment of God on Christian sin. In the Muslim world, a different lesson was drawn. The Franks could be beaten. Not just in ambushes, not just in mountains, beaten at the walls of a great city, and sent home humiliated. And Damascus, the last Muslim friend the kingdom had, would never trust the Crusaders again.
Nur ad-Din Mahmud was everything his father was not. Zengi had ruled through terror. His son ruled through belief. He drank no wine, he wore plain cotton, he prayed in public and wept while doing it. When his wife complained of their modest household, he answered that he owned nothing. He was only the treasurer of the Muslims. This was not weakness, it was a weapon. Nur ad-Din understood something Zengi never had. Armies conquer cities. Ideas conquer worlds. He rebuilt jihad, not as a slogan, but as a system. He founded religious schools by the dozen. He commissioned poets, preachers, and scholars to speak of one thing, the liberation of Jerusalem. He even ordered a pulpit built, a masterpiece of carved wood, to be placed in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the day Jerusalem was retaken. He built it decades before he had any means to deliver it. That is not propaganda. That is certainty. And on the battlefield, he was his father's son. In June 1149, at Inab, he annihilated the army of Antioch. Raymond of Poitiers, the prince who had urged Louis to strike Aleppo, died on that field. Nur ad-Din sent his skull to the caliph in Baghdad in a silver box. The message was not subtle. The fight back had a leader now. But his greatest conquest required no battle at all. For 5 years, he circled Damascus, the city the Crusaders had attacked and lost. He did not besiege it, he courted it. He sent grain during shortages, his preachers filled its mosques, his agents filled its markets. Slowly, the people of Damascus began to ask why they were ruled by men who paid tribute to the Franks. On the 25th of April, 1154, Nur ad-Din's army appeared before the walls, and the citizens opened the gates themselves. Not a single day of siege. Aleppo and Damascus, the two great cities of Syria, were united under one ruler for the first time in generations. Everything the Crusader kingdoms depended on, a divided Syria, a distracted enemy, was gone. The kingdoms now shared a single, unbroken border with a single, patient enemy, and both sides now looked south toward the one prize still unclaimed: Egypt.
Egypt in the 1160s was a dying empire. The Fatimid Caliphate had ruled from Cairo for 2 centuries. Now its caliphs were children and puppets. Real power lay with the vizier, and viziers were made and unmade by murder. Egypt had wealth beyond anything in Syria: the Nile harvest, the gold of Africa, the trade of the Indian Ocean. Whoever held Egypt could feed armies forever. Whoever held Egypt would win. Both sides knew it. The race began in 1163. A deposed Egyptian vizier named Shawar fled to Damascus and made Nur ad-Din an offer: "Restore me, and Egypt will pay you tribute." Nur ad-Din sent his best general, a short, one-eyed, ferocious Kurd named Shirkuh, and Shirkuh brought his nephew, a reluctant, studious young officer named Yusuf ibn Ayyub. History would rename him Saladin. He did not want to go. He would later say he went to Egypt like a man being led to his death. For 6 years, Egypt became a chessboard. Shirkuh restored Shawar, and Shawar betrayed him, hiring the Crusaders to drive him out. King Amalric of Jerusalem invaded, then invaded again. Alliances flipped, cities burned. At one point, Shawar torched his own capital, Fustat, rather than let anyone else hold it. The fire burned for 54 days. Then, in 1168, Amalric overreached. He invaded Egypt not as a protector, but as a conqueror, massacring the town of Bilbais. Egypt's terror of the Franks outgrew its fear of Syria. Cairo invited Shirkuh in, this time as a savior. The Crusaders withdrew without a battle. In January 1169, Shirkuh entered Cairo in triumph. Shawar was arrested and beheaded within days. The one-eyed Kurd became Vizier of Egypt, the richest office in the Muslim world. He enjoyed it for 2 months. Shirkuh died suddenly in March, some said from overeating at a feast, and the court of Cairo made a fateful calculation. They needed a new vizier, someone weak, someone young, someone without soldiers or ambition, someone they could control. They chose the quiet nephew. They chose Saladin. It was the worst decision the Fatimid court ever made. It was also its last.
Saladin was 31 years old when Egypt fell into his hands. The reluctant officer who had not wanted Egypt now ruled it, and something in him changed. Contemporaries describe it almost as a conversion. He gave up wine. He gave up leisure. He said that God had given him Egypt, and something was expected in return. The court that chose him for weakness discovered its mistake within months. A conspiracy formed around the Fatimid palace eunuchs. Saladin's agents uncovered it. The ringleaders were executed. The caliph's African guard regiments rose in revolt, 50,000 men. Saladin's brother burned their quarter and broke them in 2 days of street fighting. King Amalric invaded again with a Byzantine fleet. Saladin outlasted the siege at Damietta. Storms and starvation did the rest. Piece by piece, the weak vizier dismantled every rival in Egypt. Then, in September 1171, he did the unthinkable. On his order, the Friday sermon in Cairo was read for the Abbasid Caliph of Baghdad. 2 centuries of the Fatimid Caliphate ended in a single sentence. There was no uprising, no riot. The last Fatimid Caliph was already dying, and Saladin never told him what had happened. "Let him die believing he is Caliph," Saladin said. Sunni Islam was united in name from Baghdad to Cairo. On paper, Saladin still served Nur ad-Din. In reality, Islam now had 2 rising suns, and everyone could feel the coming eclipse. Nur ad-Din watched Egypt with growing suspicion. His lieutenant's nephew had become a king in all but name. Saladin sent tribute, but not obedience. Twice he was summoned to join campaigns against the Crusaders. Twice he found reasons to turn back. Saladin's own counsel was blunt about why. The Crusader kingdom was now a buffer, the only thing standing between Cairo and Damascus. If it fell too soon, Nur ad-Din would come for Egypt next. By 1174, the old lion had had enough. Nur ad-Din began assembling an army, not against Jerusalem, but against his own vizier in Cairo. Muslim was about to fight Muslim for the right to fight the Crusaders. It never happened. In May 1174, in the citadel of Damascus, Nur ad-Din fell ill after a game of polo. Within days, he was dead, 56 years old. The man who had turned jihad from a memory into a movement died without ever seeing Jerusalem. His heir was a boy of 11. 2 months later, on the other side of the war, King Amalric of Jerusalem, the one Crusader king who understood Egypt, died of dysentery at 38. His heir was a boy of 13, a brave, intelligent, doomed child named Baldwin IV. The boy had already been diagnosed. He felt no pain in his right arm, the first sign of leprosy. In a single summer, both thrones of the East passed to children, and between them stood one grown man with an army, a treasury, and a purpose. The age of Saladin was about to begin.
Look back at the question we began with. How did a rescue mission build an executioner? Step by step, defeat by defeat, the Second Crusade taught the Muslim world it could win. The attack on Damascus destroyed the last alliance that kept Syria divided. The scramble for Egypt handed the richest land on earth to the one man capable of using it. The Crusaders did not simply lose these years, they financed the other side's victory with their own mistakes. Zengi lit the fire. Nur ad-Din built the furnace. Now the furnace had an heir, a leper boy on the throne of Jerusalem, a Kurdish sultan on the throne of Egypt. 13 years remain until they meet at Hattin, and the Crusader kingdoms are running out of time. Next episode, Saladin.